The ghost of Elias Vance arrived in a rust-eaten Ford Ranger that coughed black smoke into the biting November wind. The truck was his home, his tomb, a rolling steel coffin filled with the specters of men he used to call brothers. He killed the engine, and the silence that followed was louder than the IED that had torn his world apart. It was a silence filled with the ringing in his ears and the phantom screams of Liam and Jake. Before him stood the reason he'd driven 2,000 miles to the forgotten corner of Montana. A derelict farmhouse, its spine broken, its windows like vacant eyes staring into nothing. The paint had surrendered to the elements decades ago, leaving behind a skeleton of silvered, splintering wood. This was his inheritance, a final cosmic joke from a great uncle he'd met once at a family funeral when he was a boy, a man whose face he couldn't recall. A lawyer's letter had found him at a VA clinic in San Diego, a single sheet of paper that felt heavier than his body armor. The property was his. The last stop on a road to nowhere. Elias swung his legs out of the cab, his prosthetic knee groaning in protest against the cold. The pain was a familiar friend, a grounding wire in the storm of his mind. Shrapnel had taken the leg, but the blast had taken everything else. His career, his team, his soul. He was a former Navy SEAL, a weapon put on a shelf, left to rust alongside the forgotten machinery sinking into the overgrown fields around him. He stood there for a long time, letting the wind whip through his threadbare jacket, feeling the cold seep into his bones. It felt right. The decay of the farm was a mirror to the decay within him, a graveyard of failures. He'd come here not to start over, but to end, to find a quiet place where his ghosts could finally have him all to themselves. The air smelled of wet earth, rotting leaves, and loneliness. He took a step toward the porch, the wood groaning under his weight like a dying man. The front door was boarded up. A no trespassing sign, riddled with buckshot, was nailed crookedly to the frame. It was a warning he had no intention of heeding. This was his place to haunt now. He walked the perimeter, his limp more pronounced on the uneven ground. The barn had collapsed on one side, its ribs splayed open to the sky. A tractor from a bygone era was being slowly consumed by rust and weeds. A monument to forgotten work. Everything was broken. Everything was dead or dying, just like him. His hand drifted to the cool, hard shape of the pistol tucked into the waistband of his jeans. It had been his constant companion since he'd left the hospital, a tool for a job he hadn't yet found the courage to complete. Maybe here. Maybe when the first snows came and buried the world in white, he could finally find his own peace in the silence. He remembered Kandahar, the searing heat, the taste of dust and cordite. Jake laughing just seconds before the world turned to fire and thunder. Liam's hand reaching for him in the smoke-choked chaos, then vanishing. He'd woken up in Landstuhl, a piece of his body gone, but the weight of their dog tags, which he now wore under his shirt, was an anchor drowning him in an ocean of guilt. He was the one who walked away. He was the one who had to carry the silence. That was his life now, a collection of before and after. Before, he was a warrior, a protector, part of a brotherhood forged in blood and fire. After, he was just Elias, a man with a hollow space where his purpose used to be. The military had built him into a precision instrument of violence, and then, when he was broken, they had thanked him for his service and shown him the door. They sent him back to a world he no longer understood, a world that didn't understand him, a world that looked at his scars and his haunted eyes and saw a monster or a victim, but never the man he once was. This farm, this ruin, felt like the only honest place left on earth. It didn't pretend to be whole. He turned back toward the house, resolved to find a way inside, to claim his mausoleum. That's when he heard it. Not a sound of nature, not the wind or the creak of old wood. It was a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the soles of his boots. He froze. All the dormant senses, the combat-honed instincts he'd tried so hard to bury, flared to life. His posture shifted, his weight balanced. His eyes scanned the shadows pooling beneath a thicket of overgrown pines near the edge of the property. And then he saw him. A German shepherd stepped out of the gloom. It was a magnificent animal, or it would have been. Now, it was a shadow of itself, emaciated, its ribs a washboard beneath a coat of matted fur. But it was the way the dog held itself that stopped Elias cold. Its head was high, its stance unwavering. There was no fear in its posture, only a deep, weary vigilance. It stood its ground, the silent guardian of this forgotten place. The dog didn't bark, it just watched him. A low rumble, an unbroken promise of violence if he took another step. Elias raised his hands slowly, palms out. The universal sign of peace, a gesture he hadn't used in a very long time. He looked into the dog's eyes. They were a pale, intelligent amber, and in their depths, Elias saw a reflection of his own soul. He saw the same exhaustion, the same pain, the same stubborn refusal to surrender. This was no stray. This was a soldier, a warrior left behind on a lonely outpost. The dog wasn't just guarding a piece of land. It was guarding the last thing it had left, its duty. For the first time in 3 years, Elias felt something other than the gnawing emptiness or the sharp agony of memory. It was a flicker of recognition, a kinship. He and this dog, they were the same. Both were survivors of a war nobody else could see. Both were standing guard over ruins. "Easy, boy," Elias said, his voice a rusty rasp from disuse. "I'm not here to hurt you." The growl didn't cease, but it didn't escalate either. The dog held its position, a living, breathing line in the sand. It wouldn't let him approach the house, the heart of its territory. But it also didn't charge. It was a stalemate. The dog seemed to understand he wasn't an immediate threat, but it wasn't ceding an inch of ground. Elias tried to take a step to the side, toward the collapsed barn, and the dog mirrored his movement, cutting him off. He was trapped, a prisoner on his own land, held captive by a four-legged ghost with eyes that knew too much. He could have unholstered his weapon. He could have ended the standoff in a single, deafening moment. The old Elias, the operator, would have assessed the threat and neutralized it. But that man was dead and buried in the sands of Afghanistan. The man standing here now just saw another veteran who refused to leave his post. He slowly backed away, retreating to the safety of his truck. The dog watched him go, its amber eyes never leaving him until the truck door was closed. Elias sat in the driver's seat, the engine silent, and stared at the canine sentinel. He couldn't stay. He couldn't leave. The dog wouldn't let him near the house, but its presence had erected an invisible fence around the entire property. Leaving felt like desertion. It felt like leaving a brother behind. Again. He spent the night in the cab of his truck, the cold a constant, biting companion. He watched the dog make its rounds, a silent, tireless patrol. A true soldier. Elias knew then that his plan to fade away in this place had been complicated. He couldn't just lie down and die here, not while another soldier was still on duty. The next morning, the crunch of tires on the gravel road announced a visitor. A white county vehicle pulled up behind Elias's Ranger, and a man in a crisp uniform stepped out. He was thick-set, with a face that seemed permanently soured. His name tag read, Miller, Animal Control. "This your truck?" Miller asked, his hand resting on the butt of a tranquilizer gun holstered on his hip. "It is," Elias said, stepping out of the cab. "Got a call about a vagrant squatting on the Vance property, and about a dangerous dog." Miller's eyes flicked past Elias to where the German shepherd stood, silent and watchful, near the porch. "I'm Elias Vance. This is my property now, and the dog is with me." The words came out before he'd even thought them through. They felt foreign and true at the same time. Miller scoffed. "That so? Got paperwork? Because that animal looks feral. It's a public nuisance. Policy is clear. I have to impound it." He took a step forward, reaching for his catchpole. The dog's low growl deepened into a snarl, a flash of white teeth against dark gums. It was a warning, a final one. Something inside Elias, a switch that had been rusted in the off position for years, flipped. The fog in his head cleared, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. He moved without thinking, his body remembering the economy of motion that had kept him alive in kill zones across the globe. He didn't move fast, but with a deliberate purpose that was far more intimidating. He stepped between Miller and the dog. "You're not touching him," Elias said. His voice was quiet, a low rumble that carried more menace than a shout ever could. Miller stopped, surprised by the sudden intensity in the gaunt man's eyes. He saw something there he didn't expect. Not fear, not desperation. He saw a predator. Look, pal, I'm just doing my job. That dog is a stray and it's aggressive. It needs to be put down before it hurts someone. He's not a stray, Elias repeated, his gaze unwavering. He's my dog, and he's not aggressive. He's protective. There's a difference. You should know that. Elias's stance was relaxed, but it was the coiled stillness of a viper. Every line of his body screamed danger. I'm going to need you to step aside, Mr. Vance, Miller said, his bravado wavering. He started to raise the catchpole. If you take one more step toward him, Elias said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming a blade of ice, I'm going to take that pole from you, and you will not like what happens next. You are on my property. You are threatening my dog. I suggest you get back in your vehicle and leave. The raw, lethal certainty in Elias's voice hung in the cold air. Miller hesitated. He was a bully, used to dealing with scared homeowners and panicked strays. He was not used to dealing with a man who looked like he could dismantle him without breaking a sweat. He saw the scars on Elias's arms, the hard set of his jaw, the terrifying emptiness in his eyes that promised he had nothing left to lose. Miller swallowed hard, his authority crumbling. Fine, but you've got 24 hours to get that animal licensed and vetted. I want to see proof of a rabies shot and a full checkup from a vet. If I don't, I'm coming back with the sheriff, and we won't be so polite. He backed away, never turning his back on Elias, and climbed into his truck. As he drove off, spitting gravel, Elias finally let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline, the ghost of a feeling he hadn't experienced since his last firefight, the feeling of having a mission, of protecting something. He turned. The dog was still there, watching him. The growl had subsided. There was a new look in its amber eyes, a flicker of questioning, of appraisal. Elias had defended him. He had stood his ground for a creature he didn't even know. Looks like we're in this together, soldier, Elias murmured. He knew what he had to do. He had to earn this dog's trust. He had 24 hours. He started with the MRE he kept for emergencies, Chili Mac. He heated it on the manifold of his truck's engine, the smell filling the cold air. He placed the tray on the ground, a good 20 feet from the dog, and then retreated. The dog watched, wary, but the scent of warm food was a powerful argument. After a long, tense wait, the shepherd crept forward, snatched a mouthful, and retreated to its post to eat. It was a start. Over the next few hours, Elias talked to the dog. He didn't try to get closer. He just sat on the tailgate of his truck and spoke, telling the silent animal about his team, about the sand and the sun, about the weight of the ghost he carried. He spoke of honor and sacrifice, words that had become ash in his mouth but felt real again now, spoken into the Montana wind. The dog listened, its head cocked, its gaze steady. By dusk, a fragile truce had been brokered. The dog allowed him to get within 10 feet, close enough for Elias to see the scar above its right eye, and something else. Something that made his blood run cold, faded and blurred by time and dirt, but unmistakable. A tattoo on the inside of its ear, a series of letters and numbers. He knew that marking. It wasn't a breeder's mark, it was military. What are you? Elias whispered, a chill running down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. The next morning, he made his move. He left the truck door open, a piece of jerky on the passenger seat. Come on, he said softly. We have to go for a ride. It's either me or the guy with the pole. The dog hesitated, looking from Elias to the house, its post. It was a choice. A choice between duty and a new, uncertain trust. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, the dog limped forward, sniffed the seat, and with a grunt of effort, pulled itself into the cab. The battle was won. The nearest town was little more than a wide spot in the road with a gas station, a diner, and a small veterinary clinic. The sign read, Thorn Veterinary Services. A bell chimed as Elias pushed the door open. The place smelled of antiseptic and animal fear. The dog stayed close to his leg, a low, anxious whine in its throat. A woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and dark hair pulled back in a severe bun looked up from the front desk. "Can I help you?" Her gaze took in Elias's ragged appearance and the formidable dog at his side. Her expression became guarded. "My name is Elias Vance. This is my dog. We need a checkup and a rabies shot. Urgently." "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her tone crisp. "And he'll need a muzzle." "No appointment and no muzzle," Elias stated flatly. "He won't be a problem." The woman, whose name tag identified her as Dr. Eris Thorne, raised an eyebrow. "I'll be the judge of that. Bring him through." In the examination room, the dog was tense, but remarkably disciplined. It stood on the cold steel table without protest, though its body trembled. Dr. Thorne approached cautiously. "What's his name?" "I don't know," Elias admitted. Eris began her examination, her movements efficient and professional. "He's severely malnourished, dehydrated. He has an old fracture in his left hind leg that didn't heal properly. Some lacerations. He's been through hell." Her professional coolness softened with a touch of empathy as she worked. Then her fingers found the inside of his ear. She paused. "What is this?" "That's why I'm here," Elias said. "I think he's military." Eris cleaned the area. The tattoo became clear. K9SM77. Kaiser. Serial number 77. "Kaiser," she whispered. "That's what the K usually stands for." She pulled out a microchip scanner. "Let's see what else he's hiding." She ran the scanner over the dog's shoulder blades. It beeped. A long string of numbers appeared on the small screen. Eris frowned and typed the number into her computer. The system churned for a moment before a new window popped up. It was emblazoned with a crest that made Elias's heart stop. The seal of the Department of Defense. Below it, a single line of red text. "Property of U.S. Gov. Asset classified. Do not proceed." Eris Thorne leaned back in her chair, her face pale. "Elias, this dog doesn't belong to you. He belongs to the U.S. government, and his file is sealed at a level I've never seen before." The air in the small room grew thick and heavy. The bureaucratic threat of Deputy Miller was a joke compared to this. The United States military did not lose its assets. They reclaimed them. Kaiser wasn't just a stray. He was a secret. And they had just tripped the alarm. "What does that mean?" Elias asked, his voice tight. "It means we have a very big problem," Eris said, her eyes wide. "It means people are going to come looking for him. And they're not going to be like that deputy." As if on cue, the lights in the clinic flickered and went out. The building was plunged into the gray gloom of the late afternoon. Eris gasped. Elias didn't. He was already moving. He strode to the window, peering through the blinds. A black, unmarked van had pulled into the alley behind the clinic, blocking the only other exit. Two men in dark tactical gear, devoid of any insignia, were getting out. They moved with the fluid, predatory grace of professionals. "They're here," Elias said, his voice deadly calm. The ghost was gone. The operator was back. "Who?" Eris whispered, her voice trembling. "Not the government," Elias said, his mind racing, processing angles, exits, threats. "Not officially. They're contractors. Or worse. They're here for the dog." Kaiser, who had been standing tensely on the table, let out a low, menacing growl. He knew. He smelled the threat. He looked at Elias, and for the first time, there was no question in his eyes. There was only alliance. "Get down," Elias commanded Eris, pointing to the space behind the heavy steel desk. "And stay down." He scanned the room, his eyes cataloging every object as a potential weapon. A heavy-duty stapler, a glass jar of cotton balls, a fire extinguisher. He grabbed the extinguisher, heavy, good. The front door of the clinic splintered open, kicked in with a single violent blow. Two men swept in, rifles up. A third man, taller and leaner than the others, walked in behind them. He had the cold, dead eyes of a shark. This was their leader. "We're here for the dog," the leader, Rook, said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Hand it over, and the vet gets to live. You were never here." Elias didn't answer. He stood beside the examination table, one hand resting reassuringly on Kaiser's back. He was calculating. 2 rifles, 1 sidearm on the leader, 3 hostiles. Unfavorable odds. But they didn't know who he was. They saw a broken down vet. They didn't see a seal. That was his edge. Last chance, Rook said, raising his rifle. In that split second, Elias acted. He twisted the pin on the fire extinguisher and blasted a thick cloud of CO2 at the 2 riflemen. They choked, momentarily blinded, their training screaming at them to clear their fields of fire. It was the only opening Elias needed. He launched himself forward, not at the men, but at the gurney in the corner of the room. He kicked it hard, sending it careening into the legs of the first rifleman, who went down with a cry of pain. Elias brought the heavy extinguisher down in a brutal arc on the second man's helmet. The crack of carbon fiber and bone echoed in the small space. The man collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. Rook, reacting with professional speed, fired his sidearm. The shot was deafening in the confined space, ripping through the air where Elias's head had been a second before. Elias was already on the floor, rolling, coming up with a scalpel he'd palmed from a surgical tray. But the first rifleman was recovering, bringing his weapon back up. He had a clear shot. Before he could pull the trigger, a blur of black and tan fur exploded from the exam table. Kaiser launched himself across the room, a 4-legged missile of righteous fury. He hit the gunman square in the chest, the force of the impact throwing the man back against the wall. Kaiser's jaws, designed for this exact purpose, clamped down on the man's weapon arm. The man screamed, a high, thin sound of terror and agony as he dropped his rifle. The distraction was all Elias needed. He closed the distance to Rook, the scalpel a silver glint in the dim light. Rook fired again, wildly, the bullet shattering a cabinet of medical supplies. Elias weaved under the shot and drove the scalpel into the soft tissue of Rook's thigh. Rook grunted in pain, his leg buckling. Elias disarmed him with a swift, brutal wrist lock, the pistol clattering to the floor. He slammed Rook's head against the wall, and the man slumped, unconscious. Silence descended, broken only by the whimpering of the man whose arm was in Kaiser's jaws, the hiss of the spent fire extinguisher, and Eris's ragged breathing from behind the desk. It was over in less than 10 seconds. Elias stood, chest heaving, the adrenaline singing in his veins. He looked at the carnage. He looked at Kaiser, who released the man's arm on a quiet command, a trickle of blood on his muzzle. The dog looked back at him, panting, his amber eyes glowing with fierce loyalty. They had fought together. They had won. Eris, Elias said, his voice steady. Call the sheriff. Not the deputy, the sheriff himself. Tell him there's been an attempted robbery. He then knelt by Rook, quickly and expertly zip-tying the mercenary's hands with medical tubing. He had to control the narrative. He had to protect his allies. While they waited, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a deep, aching pain in his side. He looked down and saw the dark stain spreading across his shirt. One of Rook's wild shots had clipped him. It wasn't deep, but it was bleeding freely. Eris rushed to his side, her fear replaced by professional focus. You're hit. Lie down. It's a graze, he grunted, but the world was starting to tilt. By the time the sheriff arrived, Elias was patched up, and the 3 unconscious mercenaries were secured. The story was simple. 3 men had tried to steal drugs and were subdued. Elias left out the part about the dog's true nature, but he knew this was just the beginning. The people who sent these men would not give up so easily. He had to understand why. Why was this dog so important? The answer had to be on the farm. After giving his statement, he and Kaiser returned to the derelict property, leaving Eris to deal with the aftermath. She had simply nodded, her eyes filled with a new respect. Be careful, Elias. Back at the farm, Kaiser now followed him like a shadow. The bond, tested in combat, was now forged in steel. Elias went to the boarded-up front door of the house. This time, he didn't hesitate. He used a tire iron from his truck to pry the boards loose. The wood protested with a mournful screech. The inside of the house was a time capsule, coated in a thick layer of dust, but otherwise perfectly preserved. It smelled of old paper, pipe tobacco, and something else. A faint, lingering scent of cedar. It was the scent of a life lived. On a small, sturdy desk in the corner of the living room sat a leather-bound journal. Elias opened it. The handwriting was a strong, disciplined cursive. The memoirs of Sergeant Major Samuel Vance, his great-uncle. He sat down, Kaiser resting his head on his knee, and began to read. The journal told the story of a man who had served 2 tours in Vietnam as a dog handler. It spoke of the horrors of war, the loss of friends, and the unbreakable bond between a soldier and his K9 partner. Samuel, like Elias, had come home broken, haunted by the jungle just as Elias was haunted by the desert. Then the entries shifted to the present day. Samuel wrote about his retirement on this isolated farm, his battle with his own demons. And then he wrote about Kaiser. They were going to put him down, Samuel wrote. A $10 million dog, a product of some black-budget DARPA project to create the ultimate soldier canine. They called the program Aegis. Kaiser was the 7th of his line. Faster, stronger, smarter than any dog I'd ever seen. But the program was scrapped. Political pressure. The dogs were deemed too aggressive, too expensive. Surplus assets. I couldn't let that happen. I pulled every string I had left, called in every favor from a lifetime of service. I brought him home. I brought Kaiser home. Elias's breath caught in his throat. This dog wasn't just an MWD. He was a super soldier, a living weapon someone desperately wanted back. The final entries were what shattered him. My health is failing, Samuel had written. I've been looking into my family, what little I have left. My grandnephew, Elias. I read his file. The Navy tried to bury it, but I know the right people to ask. Kandahar, the IED, the whole team gone. They gave him a medal and a medical discharge. I saw his psych eval, severe PTSD, survivor's guilt. They said he was non-responsive to treatment. I know what that means. It means he's drowning. I see the same ghost in his eyes that I see in Kaiser's. The same one that's looked back at me from the mirror for 50 years. They are 2 broken soldiers from different wars, but they speak the same language, the language of loss. I'm leaving Elias the farm. Maybe 2 lost souls can find their way home together. Maybe they can stand guard for each other. Tears streamed down Elias's face, the first he'd shed since the blast. He wasn't a stranger here. He hadn't been sent here to die. He'd been sent here to be saved. He looked down at Kaiser, who whined softly and licked the tears from his cheek. The dog understood. A sound outside broke the spell. The distinct thwump, thwump, thwump of helicopter rotors. A spotlight cut through the darkness, washing the farmhouse in harsh, sterile light. This time it wasn't contractors. Black SUVs were rolling up the gravel road. Men in official uniforms, military police, were deploying, forming a cordon. This was the system, coming to reclaim its property. A man with a colonel's insignia on his collar approached the porch, a megaphone in his hand. Elias Vance, this is Colonel Davies, Department of Defense. You are in possession of a classified government asset. Surrender the asset now. You have been authorized to walk away. Do not make this difficult. Elias felt a cold rage build in his chest. An asset. They called this living, breathing, loyal soldier an asset. He would not let them take him. He would die here first, on this porch, defending his family. He stepped out, his hand on his sidearm, Kaiser growling at his side. This was it. A final stand. But before he could speak, before he could throw his life away, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A number he hadn't seen in 3 years. He answered it. Elias, it's Marcus Thorne. Commander Thorne, his old CO, the man who had pinned his medals on him, the man who had delivered the eulogies for his team. Son, what in the hell have you gotten yourself into? Sir, Elias choked out, his voice thick with emotion. They're here for my dog. I know. Thorne's voice was grim. The vet, Dr. Thorne, she's my cousin, called me. Gave me the whole story, the attack, the chip. I've been on the horn for the last hour pulling rank. You stay put, Elias. Do not engage. Let me handle this. Elias watched as Colonel Davies' phone rang. The colonel answered, his posture stiffening. He listened, his face growing pale. Yes, Admiral. I understand, sir. Yes, completely understood. He hung up, his expression a mixture of fury and disbelief. He looked at Elias, then at the dog. The asset K9SM77 has been officially designated as retired and is remanded to your permanent care under the Hero Hounds Act, Davies said, the words tasting like acid in his mouth. My orders are to stand down and withdraw. You're a lucky man, Vance. He turned and barked orders to his men. Within minutes, the vehicles and the helicopter were gone, leaving only silence and the smell of diesel fumes behind. Elias sank to his knees, dropping the phone, and wrapped his arms around Kaiser's neck. The dog leaned into him, a silent pillar of strength. It's over, Elias whispered into his fur. We're home. 1 year later, the Montana sun shone down on a farm that was no longer a ruin. It was a sanctuary. A new fence, straight and true, enclosed a green pasture. The barn, its collapsed side rebuilt, stood proud against the blue sky. The farmhouse had new windows that shone, and a curl of smoke drifted from its chimney. Elias Vance stood on the porch, a cup of coffee in his hand. The haunted look was gone from his eyes, replaced by a quiet peace. The scars were still there, on his body and on his soul, but they were no longer open wounds. They were just part of his story. His limp was less pronounced, his frame filled out. He was no longer a ghost. A familiar truck pulled up the drive, and Dr. Eris Thorne stepped out, carrying a bag of groceries and a new chew toy. She smiled when she saw him. Morning, Elias. Their friendship had become a quiet, steady rhythm in his new life. A bridge back to the world. Eris. He greeted her with a genuine smile of his own. Kaiser trotted out to meet her, his tail wagging, a picture of health and happiness. He nudged her hand before returning to his post at Elias's side. He was never far. They were a family. Two broken soldiers who had found their mission not in the noise of battle, but in the quiet peace of a forgotten farm. They had stood guard for each other, and in doing so had saved each other. Elias looked out over the land his great uncle had left him, a legacy of hope he never knew he needed. He reached down and threw a worn tennis ball. Kaiser bounded after it, a joyful living testament to the fact that even in the deepest darkness, a single flicker of loyalty can be enough to lead you back into the light. He was home. Finally and completely, he was home.